It wasn't a big cat like the Tiger, nor a monster like the Panther, yet it destroyed more enemy tanks than any other German vehicle. The unassuming Sturmgeschütz III. Imagine sitting inside a squat steel box, barely taller than a man. In front of you looms a massive gun barrel. Behind you the engine roars, and around you there's barely room to breathe. Your only protection is a thin wall of armor. This vehicle, plain to the eye, became the deadliest tank killer of the German Wehrmacht, and that's why today we're looking at how it was created, how it was used, and the fate of the men who fought inside it. The idea of the assault gun came directly from lessons of World War I. Infantry needed mobile fire support to knock out fortified positions. Instead of relying on cumbersome artillery, the German army wanted a direct fire weapon that could move with the infantry. In 1936, Daimler-Benz was tasked with building a vehicle based on the Panzer III chassis, but without a turret. Instead, the gun would be mounted directly into the hull. The first prototypes were tested in 1937, and by the 1940 campaign in France, the vehicles were already in use. Initially armed with the short 7.5 cm Stug III-37L/24 gun, they were highly effective against bunkers, machine gun nests, and infantry positions. But against enemy armor, this weapon was inadequate. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, the situation changed dramatically. German tanks encountered the Soviet T-34 and K-1, both of which outclassed most German vehicles. The solution was to upgun the Stug III. Starting in 1942, it received the long 7.5 cm Stug 40L/43 and later the L/48, which could knock out Soviet tanks at medium range. This transformed the Stug from a support vehicle into a true tank hunter. Between 1940 and 1945, over 10,000 Stug III were built, more than any other German armored vehicle. Later, variants such as the Stug H-42 were introduced, mounting a howitzer for infantry support. For the resource-strained German war economy, the Stug became indispensable, a cheaper alternative to heavier tanks like the Panzer IV or Panther. The Stug III differed fundamentally from traditional tanks. Without a turret, it was lower and harder to spot. At just over 2 meters tall, it presented an extremely small target. Its gun could only traverse about 15 degrees left and right, meaning that to engage targets outside this arc, the entire vehicle had to be turned. The crew consisted of 4 men: commander, driver, gunner, and loader. Sometimes a radio operator was also included. The driver sat in the front left, the gunner next to him, the loader behind them, and the commander in a raised position with vision slits and, later, a commander's cupola. With up to 80 millimeters of frontal armor, the Stug could withstand many Allied weapons. Its Maybach HL 120 engine delivered 300 horsepower, propelling the 23-ton vehicle to about 25 miles per hour with a range of around 100 miles. It wasn't fast compared to modern standards, but it was mobile enough for battlefield maneuvers. Tactically, the Stug became most effective in defensive roles. Crews could dig in, conceal themselves in villages or forests, and ambush enemy tanks. Its low silhouette allowed it to fire from cover, and its powerful gun could knock out most Soviet designs. In offensive operations, Stugs usually advanced with infantry, providing direct fire support against strong points while relying on the infantry to protect them from anti-tank weapons. Production was also far simpler than for a Panzer IV or Panther. Without a turret, the Stug required fewer materials and less manufacturing time. For Germany, struggling under Allied bombing and dwindling resources, this was a major advantage. Despite its effectiveness, life inside a Stug III was anything but safe. The crew was confined in a tight steel box, filled with noise, heat, and fumes from the gun. If the vehicle was hit, escape was difficult. Without separate turret hatches, all crewmen had to squeeze through the same small exits. The Stug's weak side and rear armor made it especially vulnerable to flanking attacks, and because the gun couldn't quickly swing around like a turret, the vehicle depended heavily on good positioning and cover. If caught off guard, the crew's chances of survival were slim. Conditions inside were grueling. Vibrations, deafening noise, and poor visibility wore the crew down. Temperatures ranged from freezing cold in winter to unbearable heat in summer. In the event of a penetrating hit, the crew risked burning alive, suffocating from smoke, or being torn apart by shrapnel. Soviet anti-tank guns, especially the 76.2mm ZIS-3, were particularly feared. They could penetrate even the Stug-G's frontal armor at close range. Since Stug-G's often fought at the front lines alongside infantry, they were prime targets for artillery, anti-tank rifles, and later infantry armed with Molotov cocktails or bazookas. Numerous accounts illustrate the impact of the Stug III. One of the most famous commanders was Oberwachtmeister Hugo Primodzik, who destroyed over 60 enemy tanks with his Stug and was awarded the Knight's Cross. Men like him were celebrated in Nazi propaganda, but for the average crew, life was far from glorious. Veterans recalled facing overwhelming Soviet numbers. In many battles, a single Stug could ambush and destroy multiple T-34s before its position was discovered, but once spotted, it rarely survived long. One survivor described how his Stug was hit, and the inside turned into an inferno within seconds. Only he managed to escape through the hatch. The rest of his crew perished at their stations. Such experiences left many veterans with lifelong trauma. At the same time, the close quarters fostered deep camaraderie. Crews depended on one another for survival, often fighting side by side for years. Many veterans later described their fellow crewmen as a second family. The Stug III became a symbol of Germany's defensive struggle on the Eastern Front. For the crews, every mission was a balancing act between being hunter and hunted. On the one hand, they had one of the most effective tank-killing weapons of the Wehrmacht. On the other, they were trapped inside a steel coffin, constantly aware that a single hit could end their lives. The psychological strain was immense. Many crewmen lived with the constant expectation that each mission might be their last. The pressure was heightened by the knowledge that entire infantry divisions often relied on their handful of assault guns as the only mobile reserve. For German infantry, the arrival of Stug was morale-boosting, giving them a sense of security against Soviet tanks. But the crews themselves knew they were priority targets. Once the enemy identified a Stug, all available firepower would be directed at it. Veteran testimonies reveal how this relentless pressure led to exhaustion, trauma, and emotional numbness. Some men became almost fanatically focused on their tasks, while others resigned themselves to inevitable death. By the final years of the war, with fuel, spare parts, and ammunition scarce, many Stug crews fought hopeless battles to the end, often to total destruction. The Sturmgeschütz III was neither the fastest nor the most advanced armored vehicle of World War II, but its combination of simple design, powerful gun, and low profile made it one of the most effective. With over 20,000 enemy tanks destroyed, it became the unsung backbone of the German army. For its crews, it was both a lifeline and a death trap, a machine that could save lives or consume them in an instant. The story of the Stug III reveals how closely technology, tactics, and human fate were intertwined in the brutal reality of total war.